Alright, so this is going to be a weird post-game video because this game was several games over several weeks, and it happened several weeks ago. But it's been heavy on my mind since then, and I did want to talk about it. Um, I don't even know what to call it. Post-mortem of a living dungeon. So, a while back, all of the map makers, like all of them, every map maker in the whole world, throughout history, time, and space, they all contributed to a project called the Tarrasque Task, an adventure written by DM Dave, who by now you should all know is a badass. And essentially, this adventure, a 500-foot tall super kaiju Tarrasque. Not just a regular Tarrasque, but like an old school world ending Tarrasque, has woken up and it is Hungies. The adventure is actually kind of cool because it is a Tarrasque, but you are like a party of, I want to say, level 5 characters, 4 or 5. Yeah, it's pretty weird. You deliberately get swallowed by the Tarrasque so that you can shut it down from the inside. Because this is like a second edition Tarrasque, so there's really no way to actually kill it. It's a completely invincible situation, so you just have to put it to sleep, basically. And it's crazy because, like, on the inside, you're going to all these, like, parts of the body. None of it makes sense. It's like magic school bus, let's go inside the kid and check it out, kind of thing. And some areas are flooded with blood and fluids, and some aren't, even though they should be. Body parts just sort of like combine together. I don't know. Um, when I saw the adventure, I was like, put that on my bucket list because I'm gonna run that. But I didn't actually run that. I ran, of course, my own horrible bastardization of the Tarrasque Task. In the game Skull and Shackles that I run, I added this creature called the Well, and it's basically just a Sarlacc from Star Wars. And the main bad guy, he throws people down into the creature as punishment, right? And then they are slowly digested over time, blah, 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 blah. And the love interest of one of the characters, his main squeeze, his boy of all boys, was thrown down the well. So inevitably, they're going to have to go down there and save him. Now, the party actually had a botched assassination attempt. They tried to fight all of the bosses in the adventure path at the same time. And essentially, it was a TPK. Rather than just end our campaign, I had all the characters taken alive, because bad guys like to do that, and thrown down the well, which is cool because they had to go down the well anyways. So, nice solution there. Um, yeah, so they're naked because they were taken prisoner. So they have none of their equipment, none of their fancy magical items. Just they're naked, and they've been thrown into this monster, and they have to survive. So it was really cool, and it started out really cool. Like they were fighting saliva oozes, and white blood cells were showing up, and bigger blood cells were showing up. It was cool. There's a lot of cool stuff that was happening. It was terrifying for them. I have dynamic lights turned off right now, but basically in this dungeon, they could only see, the small areas at the time. It was very claustrophobic. Uh, we were playing gross music in the background, like squelchy, kind of spooky music, because you're inside like a creature. A lot of the monsters that lived in here were bananas strong. I sent like a whole bunch of these creatures without realizing that DM Dave had just reskinned dragons. So so like there was this whole encounter where I sent like, I don't know, 8 or 9 dragons against them. It was pretty crazy. I mean, young adult dragons, but still it was pretty nuts. Um yeah, so it was weird, and this was huge, by the way. This took me weeks. Well, there we go. This took me weeks to prep. Uh, I worked really hard on this dungeon, and I was really excited about it, really proud of it. Dynamically lit the whole thing. I had to resize assets to get it to work. I did a fresh layout. I didn't use the one from the adventure. I did a fresh layout that would work better for my narrative. I built like a whole community of survivors and then a whole community of bad survivors. And then I had this whole area that was supposed to be like a really tough dungeon area, and it was full of these creatures called meanlocks, which were survivors who had gotten corrupted um, over time and sort of embraced living inside this monster and started like a whole primitive like death cult. And yeah, you could escape from this dungeon by going out its butthole, and that would poop you back out into the real world. I mean, look at this. There was even a custom Hydra. Oh my gosh, an Oxy Hydra. Yeah. Um, Here's the thing. It it was like too gross. It was just too gross and too much. And it was so big. It was such a big dungeon. And for our campaign, right? It's a pirate campaign. It's not a dungeon crawl campaign. It's not a super dungeon crawl campaign. And they put in, I think, 3 sessions into this, and I could tell that if they did not get out of here by the third session, they were going to revolt. So when they came up with a very clever plan to skip to to skip to the butthole of the monster, I agreed to it. I was like, sure. So their plan was to go to the bladder. I should probably put a warning at the beginning of this video because it's really gross. They went to the bladder, and they went through the urethra, uh, and they were like, "We'll go through this, and that'll take us to the cloaca, which will take us to the exit, right? Because this creature only has one exit hole for pee pee and poo poo, etc., etc." So they had to fight like pee elementals. It was just really gross, right? And Skull and Shackles is a very mature game. It's certainly mature rated. There's all kinds of sexy shenanigans and gross shenanigans and morally ambiguous because fantasy pirates, the whole deal. But this adventure, it was just so gross. It was so gross. And I realize now that I probably should have checked with the party ahead of time to see if anybody would be, I guess, triggered by some of the stuff here, because it does kind of qualify as gore, because like we're inside of something. Um, yeah. So it was. I learned a lot from this. I learned a lot from this adventure. And I also, as always, relearned the lesson that you want to read the room, you want to listen to feedback from your players, you want to pay attention to your players, and you want to get a feel for are they into it or not. And despite all of the hard work that I did on this map and all of the cool encounters that I planned for this dungeon, I could tell that it just was not resonating with the players. They were like, this is gross, and we want to go home. And I needed to, as the DM, kind of respect where they were coming from and be like, yeah, I could see that. And cut it short. So, yeah, like, if I had run this in 3-hour sessions and tried to get every single thing done, they would have been in here for weeks. This dungeon was too big. There was just too much going on. And it's a great and humbling reminder that no matter how excited you are for what you're creating, no matter how fun you think it's going to be, and no matter how much work you put into the prep, you have to be willing to cut that content to keep the players happy and to keep the narrative on track and to keep the pacing and the timing of the adventure flowing smoothly. Because I tell you what, 6 weeks of this? Nah. Even I was tired of just looking at all of this gross stuff. It was a mess. So, yeah. Um, would I run this adventure again? Would I actually run the Tarrasque Task again? Maybe. I would probably use these exact same maps because it was such a chore to set up. But I would make it just like the adventure. It would be objective based, right? You're trying to get in, stop the Tarrasque, and get out. So because there's all these maps already made for it, it would be great for a one shot because you could just say you have 4 meta hours to go in, stop the Tarrasque, or it destroys the city and the surrounding countryside, and you and everybody dies. So please make sure that doesn't happen. Um, but yeah, would I run it again as a super dungeon where you have to do all these objectives? You basically have to live in here for a long time. Nah, I don't think I would do that. I personally was grossed out running this dungeon, and I can't imagine it being a sustainable experience week after week after week to complete. But as a one shot, as a warn everybody up front, this is a super nasty, super gross adventure. Yeah, it could be a fun diversion, for sure. It's just a shame that it was so much work to set up for something that really should have only been like a 4 hour excursion, because gosh, it must have taken me 8+ hours to build this and populate it and all that jazz. So bittersweet on the living dungeon, but I can at least say that the living dungeon is off of my to-do list. Bucket list item check. I have run a dungeon inside a monster, and it was even more disgusting and terrifying and awful than I could have possibly imagined. So, if you are curious about this adventure, it is available for free online. I think it's available for free online. I will link it in the description below. You can give it a shot if you're interested, or adapt it to maybe a smaller living dungeon. So, all right, later.